Warning: this video was created for educational purpose. The main goal is to provide scientific and public health related information in an understandable, easily digestible manner, with a portion of humor. Might contain disturbing disease-related images and information. Hello and welcome. In today's video we'll have a look at one of the most feared topics that has mainly entered our lives by the end of the World War II. Radiation. Invisible, yet always present. Partially due to normal, very low, non-lethal doses of background radiation emitted by the elements present in the Earth crust itself, such as radon. On the other hand, due to a long half-life time of radioactive elements, we as humanity continue emitting, poisoning everything around us. These half-life times range from mere seconds to millions of years. Needless to say that these millions of years are accompanied by non-stop emission of ionizing radiation. Ionizing radiation has sufficient energy to affect the atoms in living cells and thereby damage their genetic material, the DNA. Fortunately, the cells in our bodies are extremely efficient at repairing this damage. However, if the damage is not repaired correctly, a cell may die or eventually become cancerous. Exposure to very high levels of radiation, such as being close to an atomic blast, can cause acute health effects such as skin burns and acute radiation syndrome, also known as radiation sickness. It can also result in long-term health effects such as cancer and cardiovascular disease. Exposure to low levels of radiation encountered in the environment doesn't cause immediate health effects, but is a minor contributor to our overall cancer risk. A very high level of radiation exposure delivered over a short period of time can cause symptoms such as nausea and vomiting within hours and can sometimes result in death over the following days or weeks. This is known as acute radiation syndrome, commonly known as radiation sickness. It takes a very high radiation exposure to cause acute radiation syndrome, more than 0.75 Gray, which equals 75 rad, in a short time span, minutes to hours. This level of radiation would be like getting the radiation from 18,000 chest X-rays distributed over your entire body in this short period. Acute radiation syndrome is rare and comes from extreme events like a nuclear explosion or accidental handling or rupture of a highly radioactive source. Exposure to low levels of radiation doesn't cause immediate health effects, but can cause a small increase in the risk of cancer over a lifetime. There are studies that keep track of groups of people who have been exposed to radiation, including atomic bomb survivors and radiation industry workers. These studies show that radiation exposure increases the chance of getting cancer, and the risk increases as the dose increases. The higher the dose, the greater the risk. Conversely, cancer risk from radiation exposure declines as the dose falls. Radiation doses are commonly expressed in millisieverts, international units, or in rem, which are US units. A dose can be determined from the one-time radiation exposure or from accumulated exposure over time. About 99% of individuals would not get cancer as a result of a one-time uniform whole-body exposure of 100 millisieverts or lower. At this dose, it would be extremely difficult to identify an excess in cancers caused by radiation when about 40% of men and women in the US will be diagnosed with cancer at some point during their lifetime. Risks that are low for an individual could still result in unacceptable numbers of additional cancers in a large population over time. For example, in population of 1 million people, an average 1% increase in lifetime cancer risk for individuals could result in 10,000 additional cancers. The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, sets regulatory limits and recommends emergency response guidelines well below 100 millisieverts, to protect the US population, including sensitive groups such as children, from increased cancer risks from accumulated radiation doses over a lifetime. EPA bases its regulatory limits and non-regulatory guidelines for public exposure to low-level ionizing radiation on the linear no-threshold model, in brief LNT. The LNT model assumes that the risk of cancer due to a low-dose exposure is proportional to those with no threshold. In other words, cutting the dose in half cuts the risk in half. The use of the LNT model for radiation protection purposes has been repeatedly recommended by authoritative scientific advisory bodies, including the National Academy of Sciences and the National Council of Radiation Protection and Measurements. There is evidence to support LNT from laboratory data and from studies of cancer in people exposed to radiation. Understanding the type of radiation received, the way a person is exposed, external versus internal, and for how long a person is exposed are all important in estimating health effects. The risk from exposure to a particular radionuclide depends on, firstly, the energy of the radiation it emits, secondly, the type of radiation, alpha, beta, gamma or X-rays, thirdly, its activity, how often it emits radiation, fourth, whether exposure is external or internal. External exposure is when the radioactive source is outside of your body. X-rays and gamma rays can pass through your body, depositing energy as they go. Internal exposure is when radioactive material gets inside the body by eating, drinking, breathing or injection from certain medical procedures. Radionuclides may pose a serious health threat if significant quantities are inhaled or ingested. Fifth, the rate at which the body metabolizes and eliminates the radionuclides following ingestion or inhalation. Sixth, where the radionuclide concentrates in the body and how long it stays there. Children and fetuses are especially sensitive to radiation exposure. The cells in children and fetuses divide rapidly, providing more opportunity for radiation to disrupt the process and cause cell damage.